here.
Thank you for having me, and what I got that notification of recording, so I just want to press that before I press the wrong thing. But at any rate, no, thanks for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure to be with you today. And unless I'm told differently, because I'm going to do what I'm told, I'm going to do some introductory. There's two questions I'm going to answer: why I'm running and how we're going to win, and then open it up for questions. Does that work?
Sounds great.
For you all?
Sounds
Okay.
great. And everybody, Wesley's got a flight to catch, so we need to make sure we let him wrap up by 12:45 today. So just so you know, we'll watch the clock.
See, that's Jordan. She always is on top of stuff. Thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Sarah, for saying that too. Yeah, again, my name is Wesley Bell, and I'm the current St. Louis County prosecuting attorney. Before that, I was a city councilman in a small city you may have heard of called Ferguson, Missouri. I was actually elected in 2015, so I ran and was elected in the midst of all the protest and unrest. And I knew what I was getting into, but as a judge at the time, as a criminal justice professor at the time, as a former public defender, I felt that my skill set and experience could help right that ship. And so it was a nasty bit of business, if you will, in the sense that, every day there was protests, some peaceful, some not peaceful. And it was a very unsettling time. And a lot of folks didn't want to get involved. A lot of politicians didn't want to get involved, but there were several of us who walked toward the smoke, if you will, to make a difference. And then I was part of the negotiating team with President Obama's Department of Justice, creating the consent decree, which brought community policing, which brought court reforms, much needed court reforms. If you remember the debtors' prisons, if you read about that stuff that we saw in St. Louis County and around the state, that was an issue that needed to be addressed. And slowly but surely, we righted that ship. We were able to bring those changes, bring those reforms, and I think just as importantly, we did it in a way that brought people together. There were many folks at the time in this region who were just bashing on police and police are this, police are that. And yeah, there's always, my father's a retired police officer, and he'll tell you in any industry, there's things that you can do better. But we understand how important the role of police officers are. We understand how important it is to public safety, and it's important to give them support. So instead of going against one side or the other, we stood in between protesters and police to help bridge that gap, work together to actually bring those changes. And that's how we were able to do it. And that's kind of a prelude to what I'm going to talk about, what we need more in DC. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So before that, so after that, we ran for county prosecutor against a 7-term incumbent who had been in office for 28 years. Similar situation in the sense of this election now, people said, oh, there's no way you can win. There's no, in this election, there's no way a Democrat can win. We were told we can't win that election. But we hit the ground. We knocked on the doors. We made the phone calls. We took our message to every corner of this county, which is the largest county in the state. And we not only won, but we won by 13 points. We won in a landslide. And when we got in that office, we got to work. St. Louis County, as many of you know, is a very unique place. We have 88 municipalities. We have 55 police departments. So if you're not going to try to work together, that's not going to work here. And so we immediately got to work to build those relationships, meeting with our law enforcement partners. So many of them, as I'm coming into office, who didn't know me, 3-4 years later, when I'm running for re-election, not only do they know me, but they're supporting me. The St. Louis County Police Chiefs Association, their executive director has endorsed me and has supported and donated. Several chiefs across the county have endorsed us. And I think that's a testament to the building of relationships and the focus on doing that, which is, again, what we need more of in DC. And so I think that leadership matters. I think that in this dynamic that we're living in right now, it is not a platitude or an over-exaggeration to say that our democracy is on the line. We had a former president who literally is indicted for trying to steal elections. If not for the actions of a few Secretary of States, this election would have went to the courts, and God knows what would have happened then. We saw that in the Gore election. And so we need people who have experience in dealing with these issues and experience in how government works. And I think that the stakes are too high. And so I think that leadership matters. And so, you know, as a former Ferguson City Councilman in a very tumultuous time that helped right that ship, as St. Louis County Prosecutor in the largest county in the state with the most municipalities, most entities to have to deal with, I think that that's prepared me to bring that same approach to DC. And I think we need more of that. And so the second part is how we get there. There's a misconception that, oh, Missouri is red because there are more red voters. That's not what the data tells us. The data tells us Missouri has gone red because of a lack of turnout by Democrats, and there's always the blame on rural folks. The data doesn't support that either. It is not the fault of rural folks. It is the fault in this order, and I just want to be honest and blunt with you: St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield, and St. Louis is number one as far as the reason why this state has gone red, and the numbers bear it out. In 2 years ago, Trudy Bush lost by about 260,000 votes statewide. Kansas City, there were about 106,000 registered voters who didn't show up. That could have put a huge dent into her numbers. But in the St. Louis region, there were over 380,000 registered voters, overwhelmingly Democrat, who didn't show up. Wow. The last time there was a presidential and a Senate race, Jason Kander, who we all know, lost by 74,000 votes. There were 96,000 registered voters in Kansas City who didn't show up, overwhelmingly Democrat, which could have flipped that seat. But in the St. Louis region, 235,000 registered voters who didn't show up. So we are not red because there are more red voters. We are not red because the rural areas have let us down. We are red because of turnout in our large population centers. And then we got to get every vote we can in our rural areas. And so what we're looking at is if we can get a 25% increase in the St. Louis region, we win the election, period, hands down, it's over. And so you might say, well, that's big. How are you going to pull that off? Well, we already did it. In 2018, when we won our election, we got a 25 to 30% increase, which was the highest turnout in this region, in the history of this region. And we've been focusing on low frequency voters because I got to tell you, in Missouri, we don't have the luxury to focus on high frequency voters to win statewide. This is not California. This is not even Illinois. We have to get our high frequency voters. We have to get our low frequency voters. We have to get our marginal voters. We got to get our rural voters. This has got to be a team effort. But if we can get that turnout up in the St. Louis region, up in the Kansas City, and up in Columbia, we're going to win this election. And so I think my experience matters. I think my history of bringing people together, but also winning tough elections. We've done that before. And so this election is there for the taking. The math and the path are there, but it's got to be a team effort. It can't be big city Democrats versus small city Democrats and rural Democrats versus larger, metropolitan area Democrats. No, this has got to be a team effort. That's the only way we win. And that's what and as an attorney, when we have a case, we have our theory of the case. That's my theory of the case, and it's built off data. It's built off what the data tells us. And so, and there was a poll that just came out yesterday before I open it up for questions, which on the surface may seem discouraging, but it's actually encouraging for us. And I'll give some context, and then I'll wrap up. Sarah, I hope I'm not going too long, so I'll be wrapping this up shortly. When I ran for county prosecutor against that 30-year incumbent that I told you about, the initial polling had him at 45%, had us at 24%. It was a Missouri Scout poll. And so that seemed bleak. But what we knew is that we were focusing on low frequency voters who are not included in these kind of polls. And so we knew if a 28-year incumbent is under 50%, there's a serious opportunity there. So we got to work on focusing on those low frequency areas, building up that electorate, that base that we need in Missouri, not just in St. Louis County, but in Missouri. We got to work on it. And that's how we were able to win by such a large margin. So this poll came out by Emerson College, and it had myself against Hawley, and it had my opponent, Mr. Kuntz, against Hawley. Against Mr. Kuntz, Hawley was up 45 to 32%, 13-point difference. Okay. Against us, it was 44% to 34%. So it was a 10% difference. And why that's encouraging to us is for two reasons. In the primary, what it shows is that despite my challengers, and again, let me be clear, whoever wins the Democratic nominee, we are getting behind, period. So let me just be clear on that, but I do have to make my case in the meantime. My opponent has been running for 3 years, spending millions and millions of dollars, but those expenditures, that money has not been translating into support. What we knew is that coming into this race with 40% of the electorate already as a base, because I've been an elected official now since 2015, in this St. Louis region is 40% of the base. We have a base that knows us. I'm in the news every day for cases for public safety, which is obviously a concern for everyone, no matter where you are. So now we have a base to build off of as we head out into Kansas City, as we head out to the Boot Hill, to Pulaski County, to Springfield. We're hitting all these places, and we're just getting started, and we're already within 10 points before a lot of folks are even really paying attention to it. And we're ahead of the opponent who's never stopped campaigning, who's never stopped raising money and spending money. And so as we start getting our message out and getting getting out to all the areas of the state, listen, we feel like we're in a place which is the reason we got in this race in the first place. We're in a place to get this guy. And at the end of the day, listen, when I talk to people in Rolla, when I talk to people in Monroe City, man, they don't care about anything other than they want to win. They are tired of not having a voice in Washington, D.C. or Jefferson City for that matter. That's what it's about. And that's why I'm in the race. And that's how we're going to win. So I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to meet with you. I'm a Mizzou grad. And so I bleed that black and gold, man. So I'm really excited about the programs. I'm getting off subject, but I'm just excited. We got a big game in Kentucky Saturday. But anyway, I know you're not here to talk about that. But with that said, Sarah, I'm gonna pass it back and
sure.
However you want
We've
to
already got one question in the chat. Kathy asks, why do you think Democratic voters have not been turning out to vote in these elections? Do you have a theory about that?
I do. I think what you've seen is, so Missouri is an interesting place. Two largely Democratic large cities, Columbia, which is, another haven of Democrats, and then Springfield, pockets of Springfield. And what you'll see is that the path to victory 10 years ago, and I kind of use it post-McCaskill, or pre-McCaskill, post-McCaskill. That's kind of how I define this thing. So AP and after McCaskill, whatever. And I love Claire. I stumped for her and organized events for her and everything. But that was a time when you could run to the rural areas. You could get your votes in the St. Louis and Kansas City area. You didn't need overwhelming turnout, because all you had to do was you had opportunities to get votes in the rural areas and win some of those counties and be much more competitive in those counties. So many of our statewide Democrats ran more like moderate Republicans. And again, I think that we got to run moderate in some ways. We got to appeal to everyone. But then there's some issues that we're going to take a stand on, period. But what happens is that when you're running in that way, it turns off many of your blue bloods in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Columbia, and they're not as enthused. So we'll win Kansas City, St. Louis, and Columbia, but we won't get the turnout that we need, but we haven't needed it before. But now I think we got to be honest. We're not winning the rural counties. If there's a D in front of your name, I don't care what you look like. If there's a D in front of your name, you're not going to win those counties. But we're not going to ignore them. But it's one of those, think of it like this. Instead of losing 80 to 20, if we lose 70 to 30, but we're able to get the increased turnout in the large population centers up the 70 corridor, up and down the 70 corridor, that's our path to victory. But I think that model that one could win the election 10, 15 years ago is different now. You got to play to your base now. You got to play to your voters now in those 5 counties. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be clear. I don't want anyone leaving saying Wesley's not going to ignore the rule. No, we've been hitting them hard because we know we got to look under every couch cushion, every car cushion, every car seat to get every vote that we can. But where we know the math and the path is St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield, and we got to really hit those votes, and we got to make certain that we're reaching out to those voters to give them a reason to come out and not just win Kansas City, St. Louis, and Columbia, but get those overwhelming turnout numbers that we need. Because if we get a 25% in the St. Louis region, which we've done before, we're probably going to win. But let's just say we increase that turnout in Columbia a little bit. We also increase that turnout in Kansas City, which always is in the 100,000 registered voters who don't show up. Now we win by several points. So again, I'm going to keep saying that the math and the path is there. And one advantage that I have is that I'm already a known entity in the St. Louis region. So which is our weakest, where we've been the weakest, if you will, as far as the turnout. And so now as we get out to the other areas and introduce ourselves and we have a record to run on, that resonates with voters.
Great. I'm going to read one more question from the chat and then we can go to the telemas. Scott asks, tell us about your funding, your largest donors, and your budget compared to all of your opponents. That's a big question.
Okay. Yes. And so in federal elections, the campaign limits that one can donate are $3,300 per cycle. So $6,600 for the primary and $6,600 for the general election. And so we have really been focusing on not only the legal community, but obviously the legal community, but calling donors, but also getting out to the low donors too. I mean, those things can add up. And so as far as our opponent, hey, that's one thing that he got a head start on us on. He never stopped campaigning since the loss in the primary. And so he was able to build that digital platform, if you will, that gets a lot of out-of-state money. And hey, I tip my hat to him. But what we're seeing is that that's not translating into votes. What he lost to Trudy Bush by, his polling is lower than that, despite 3 years of nonstop campaigning and millions of dollars spent. It's not translating because I think there's sometimes we have this misconception that low frequency voters don't vote because they just forgot that there was an election. But that's not what the data tells us. The data tells us is that low frequency voters don't vote because they don't feel like they have a voice in government. They don't feel like they're being heard or listened to. And honestly, it's the truth. What happens is that campaigns target high frequency voters because you have limited resources. And so you got in low frequency voters, the data is unreliable. Their addresses are often outdated. The phone numbers are often not up to date. And so you make these business decisions to say, well, I'm going to focus my money over here with the high frequency voters because I know I'm going to get more bang for our buck. But just think, we start doing that 10 years ago. And so in the next election cycle, that low frequency voters push down even farther. He or she doesn't hear from anyone. 4 years later, they don't hear from anyone. Now, 10 to 15 years later, there are so many low frequency voters who have never been asked for their vote. They've never received a piece of political mail and they don't feel connected. And so we've been focusing on low frequency voters, and what resonates with them is when you can tell them, hey, this is what I've done. We came in and we said we were going to do 2 things at once. We were going to aggressively prosecute serious and violent crimes, but for low-level nonviolent crimes, people struggling with opioid abuse, people struggling with mental health issues, we were going to expand treatment programs. And so we increased the number of homicides that we prosecuted in St. Louis County. We increased the number of sexual assaults we prosecuted in St. Louis County, but we also expanded the number of people that we provided treatment. And I'm a data person. So with those folks that we've treated, over 2,100 people that didn't go to jail, but instead got treatment, we're talking a 5.9% recidivism rate. So a 96% success rate with those folks. So when we talk about public safety, we know those serious and violent offenders have to be held accountable, but then there's this whole bucket of people who just need help. They're struggling with the disease and we give them that help. And as a result, we've decreased the jail population by close to 30% in St. Louis County, while the recidivism rates are still staying low with those people that we're able to help. And that resonates with people. We changed the criminal justice system in St. Louis County. There's more work to do, but we've done that. And that's something that I can talk about. We've made a stand with women reproductive rights. We've joined a group of prosecutors around the country in a letter saying we would refuse to prosecute those cases. I was the only prosecutor in the state to do that because I don't believe that a woman's body should be property of the state of Missouri or any state for that matter. And I wanted people to know where I stood. Matter of fact, I asked to be at the top of that letter like John Hancock in the Declaration of Independence so everybody would see where I stood. And so I think that those things resonate with voters when you can come to them, and low frequency voters in particular, when you can say, this is what we've done. And I think we all know from experience, grassroots campaigns, they'll beat the money. Now, don't get me wrong. We're doing our best to raise as much money as we can. We know that once the general election clears, the national money is going to pour in because Holly is in the crosshairs of a lot of folks nationally. But, it's going to be a struggle through the primary election. But listen, I got outraised 7-1 when I ran against that 28-year incumbent that I told you about. But we went to the voters and we made our case. And 4 years later, when I ran for re-election in county prosecutor in a 60-40 county, Republicans didn't even bother putting a challenger up. And so that's the message that we're going to take, and that's the theory of the case, and we're going to take that message across the state. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. How much money do you have in the bank now?
Oh, Jordan would have to answer that question. I know we've raised probably about 300,000. Now I just got in the race in June, and so yeah, we've raised about 300,000. And let me be clear, we just need enough to get our message out, and we're going to do that.
What's your budget? What's your goal? How much do you think it'll take to overcome the bigger budget of Coon?
See, that's the thing. And let me answer this question as directly as I can. We don't have to outraise Koontz. We just need enough money to get our message out, because we have something that he doesn't have, is that we have a record to run on. And again, no disrespect to him. Anybody who gets in the race, especially Democrats, we're gonna support whoever wins the primary. And I've told him that, and we've talked about it. Whoever wins, we're gonna support him. But the bottom line is that in 40% of the electorate, I'm already a known commodity where folks know us. And so now it's just a matter of getting out to those other areas, Kansas City, which I've been in Kansas City every other week, been to Columbia several times, getting around the state, because the most impactful way to get a vote, to get turnouts, is to ask for it directly and to get people to reach people directly and ask for that vote. So yeah, the one argument he can make is he never stopped raising money. So that's one argument he can make. But what elections have shown us is that incumbents that have a record to run on, that have a base already, tend to win elections. And that's why you saw in that poll that I cited, and you can look at it yourself. Emerson College did that poll. Despite his spending millions of dollars over 3 years, we're still ahead of him against Hall. And we're just getting started.
Thank you. Good answer.
Follow on.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Follow on to that. Thank you for emphasizing the importance of turnout. 2024, up and down the ballot, is going to be a turnout election.
Absolutely.
But money matters. And I want to know a little bit more about what you've done to try to build an army for this purpose, including leaders, people who are in office, have been in office, and so forth. Claire's target for the last election was 25 million, and she got it. And that probably is a ballpark. But you need to, who do you know is going to help you get into that ballpark, because it is that ballpark in combination with a turnout machine, which is going to be successful, and that's the only way you can win.
Absolutely. And so let me clarify. Claire's that 25 million goal was for the entire election. So there's two parts to that question, the primary and then the general. And so the first question I was asked was about that primary election. And in the primary election, we just got to get there. If we get there, I'm very confident. Again, I was always taught, you run like you're behind, you run like you're scared. But objectively speaking, we're confident in our position where we are. But what we've been doing also is relationships that I've built over the last 10 years nationally. We've talked to these organizations. We know about these organizations. Many of them don't want to get involved in a primary, particularly a contested primary, which I get, and it makes sense. But once the primary clears, the money is going to flow. So let me just be clear. Kuntz or myself do not have enough money to go against Hawley. Neither one of us do. We're going to need that national money coming in the general election to get a whiff of Hawley. Now, and that's one advantage that we have in the sense that we've had those relations built, because when we talk to the DNCC, when we talk to all these organizations, they know us. They know we're going to spend our money right. They know we've won tough elections. So we've talked to them and they tell us when the primary clears or if he gets out early, we're in. But, you know, and it makes sense. Like, you want to find out who's going to win before you get in. And I get that. So I don't have any issue with that. We just want to make sure we're building those responsibility, those relationships, and making sure we're keeping in contact. So we're doing those things. So we're ready to go, because you guys all have to remember, we got a short turnaround because our primary is so late. But that's another advantage that we have that my opponent doesn't have. We've done this before. We have our volunteer, that army that you spoke of, that base already in place. We got those folks. And so we can turn that around and get moving much more quicker than someone who hasn't built those relationships. And that's just one advantage that we have. I want to be clear though, we got to beat Hawley. I'm a Democrat. I support Democrats. I've always supported Democrats. I stumped for Claire. As my platform grew and they actually wanted me, I stumped for Claire. I stumped for Trudy when she won the primary. I've worked with getting Democrats elected since even before I was in office. And so one thing we have to do is we got to build the electorate out. That's something that we got to think about doing, that we have to think about if we're going to not only win this election, but also continue to win elections. And I'm going to tell you like this, we get an increase in turnout in St. Louis. And I think Politics 101 is someone from St. Louis that has done it before has better likelihood of getting turnout in St. Louis. That's not just going to impact my race. There's a very good chance we're going to see a Governor Quaid or Democrat, whomever that Democrat is, because those votes are going to be Democratic votes. And so I think that there's an opportunity to win up and down the ballot, as well as seeing that there's going to be potentially a reproductive rights initiative on the ballot. We got an opportunity to flip this state. And so, I want to be clear, on November 5th, 2024, on my 50th birthday, really, November 5th, 2024 is my 50th birthday, I'm going to wake up either as the St. Louis County Prosecutor or the U.S. Senator-elect. But regardless of how I wake up, we and myself have to continue to work toward building the electorate out in Missouri. We have to. We cannot just keep focusing on high-frequency voters. And when you have someone who's never served in office, you're not going to be able to make a compelling argument to low-frequency voters. It's just, you look at the numbers, look at the history. That's just a disadvantage. But like I said, whomever wins will have hopefully it's me, but we'll have my absolute support because we got to get Holly out of there.
All right. I'm going to pick up some more of these questions in the chat. Some of them you sort of touched on, so I apologize if they're a little repetitive.
No problem.
This one, no, though. Nancy asks or says, I'm concerned that lots of those voters who don't turn out regularly may not realize they now have to have a state-issued voter ID. Do you have a plan to help make sure that they have the ID they need when they go to vote?
Absolutely. And that's something that we've been working on for about 5 or 6 years with voter protection. And so when I talk about expanding the electorate, we've been working on that. So in my last election, which was my re-election last year, where I didn't have a Republican opponent, we could have just set out the election, but instead we focused our resources on low frequency voters and educating people on where they could vote, how they could vote. What people have to realize, and we got to make sure we're getting this message out, is that yes, get your ID, get registered and vote. Those things have to be coupled together every time you talk about registration and voting. But also make certain people understand, if you don't have your ID, still go vote. Get a provisional ballot. It'll still be counted. So we got to make sure, we got to make a push to get people registered. There are organizations that work to get people free IDs, but also if you don't, still go vote. There's provisional ballots, and we got to make sure that we're getting that message out there. In Missouri, we have some of the most restrictive voting laws in the country. If you live in St. Louis City and you move just about a block down the street into St. Louis County, you got to re-register all over again in the same state, even in some places, the same neighborhood. And so we got to make sure that we're focusing on that. But then at the end of the day, if you are not registered or if you don't have your ID, still get up there. We got to make sure we're telling people that.
Great. Thank you so much. And then Tyler has got kind of some nuts and bolts questions. Some of this you've touched on. He says, can you talk about what you would do if elected? For instance, would you support abolishing the filibuster to pass a new Voting Rights Act, codify Roe, pass the PRO Act, etc.?
So Tyler, I appreciate you asking that question because I had that in my notes to mention, and I got off on a tangent and I didn't say it. And so I'm going to start with a big pick. First of all, yes, I agree with everything that you said, but I want to give my philosophy and my approach is that I think that we need folks in DC who will work with the other side when appropriate, but will take a stance when needed. And when Democrats, one issue that I have with our Democrat leaders in DC throughout the years, don't get me wrong, I'm a card-carrying blue blood Democrat, but there's one thing that we haven't done is that when we have majorities, we haven't pushed enough. We could have codified Roe versus Wade years ago. We could have ensured the Voting Rights Act was protected years ago. We could have pushed for filibuster reform years ago. You think about, and this is the greatest country in the world. I will stand on that. I will die on that hill. But there, like any place, there's things that we've done wrong in our history. And the filibuster has been used to continue those injustices and abuses historically. And so I would absolutely be in favor of filibuster reform. Our government is built on the idea of one person, one vote, not having to get what is near a supermajority in order to get just common sense legislation passed. We should have been pushing on common sense gun laws. And I'm a gun owner, but I'm a responsible gun owner. My father taught me how to use guns. In law enforcement, I trained, so I use those, so I know how to use them. A lot of folks don't. But we got, if you live in Boone County, that's a different dynamic than when you live in the city of St. Louis. And local leaders should be able to regulate guns more so, because it's to a point now where folks don't even feel comfortable taking their families down to Busch Stadium to watch a baseball game because people are walking around with AR-15s. Kids are walking around with AR-15s, and law enforcement, by and large, can't even stop it. And we're talking about just common sense gun laws. And we haven't pushed on them, but that's something that we need to do and something that I intend to do when I get to DC.
Roe versus Wade.
And codify Roe versus Wade. We should have did that years ago, and that's something that you will not have to question where I stand on that position. I've been out front, I've written op-eds about it. I've been very public about my position, just like that letter we signed with prosecutors around the country. You know where I stand. You don't have to guess or speculate.
Tillamus, do you have another question?
I
see
have a
your hand is
question.
up.
You said that you listed the four big cities were very low on turnout. And you said Columbia had worse turnout than Springfield. I was a little surprised at that.
No. Let me clarify. What I
Okay.
was saying is that so St. Louis, in this order, St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield have, in that order, have the most Democrats
Okay.
and the most votes. And so these entities always go Democratic, but we're not getting the turnout that we need in order to bring those votes home. And so, no, Columbia is the turnout has been higher than in Springfield, but we need to get it if we can get it a little bit higher, and then we need to take care of business in the St. Louis region, which, again, I said it before, has been the biggest culprit in why this state has gone red. And I'm not going to blame, it is what it is, but it's been the biggest culprit, and that's what the numbers show. 235,000 registered voters who didn't show up in the last election could have turned the election. And the last time there was a presidential and a Senate race, like there will be next year, this region could have turned the election twice. My county alone had 177,000 registered voters who didn't show up in a loss of 74,000 statewide. So, and I want to also put this in perspective. The smallest township in St. Louis County has more registered voters than those other 110 counties. So not counting Columbia, not counting Springfield, not counting Kansas City and in the St. Louis region. Has more than 80 of more registered voters than 80 of the other 110 townships around the state. So this election is about turnout, period.
Al, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, Wesley, I commend the energy that appears you have brought to this challenge. I also commend your willingness to take it on because, as you've indicated, it's not easy. One concern, I hear your data in terms of low turnout, especially among us. What do you think causes that?
So it's kind of what I alluded to earlier. I think that the path to victory was always work toward the rural areas, be competitive, win a lot of the counties in the rural areas, because you knew the St. Louis and Kansas City, you would win those elections overwhelmingly, and that was the path to victory. But where we've seen is that the rural counties, we got to be honest as Democrats, and there's reasons behind that, but they've gone cold for us. We're not going to win them. That doesn't mean we concede them, and we got to keep pushing, but we're not going to win them. So then you have to ask yourself, what is our pathway? What is our strategy to victory? And what candidates have done is, in the past, statewide candidates, again, they've run like moderate Republicans. And that turned off many. And I know that because I've talked to voters, and they weren't even keeping up with statewide politics because they felt like, hey, there's not really much difference between the two candidates on the statewide ballot. And that turns off a lot of your hardcore Democrats, and which translate into lower turnouts. If they show up, they're still going to vote for the Democrat, but you're not going to get the enthusiasm that you get when you fire up those blue blood Democrats. And the dynamic has changed in Missouri. We gotta play to our high frequency, our high population areas with Democrats. We got to play to them. It's 5 counties that we got to really focus on the turnout, and we win. And the numbers show that's the way to win. We can do it, or we can keep doing what we've been doing. We can say, hey, we're gonna go ahead and just keep on. We'll set up shop in rural Missouri, and we'll try our best to win. But I think we all know it's not happening. But I do say we don't concede them. Again, it's the same numbers I used before. Instead of losing 80-20, if we lose 70-30, that improves our margins to where we got a little more room for error in St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield. But the math in the
Thank you. No, I was just going to say thank you. I wish you well.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
We've got Wesley for about 3 more minutes. And so I'm thinking Alice's question is going to be the last one. We're all caught up on chat. So Alice, do you want to ask the last question?
Yeah. So Wesley, thank you for running and thank you for being here today. Various friends of mine have asked me, because they know I'm on the central committee in Boone County, can Koontz win? Who should we support? My answer is we are not going to win a Senate seat in this state unless we build up the state Democratic Party. So what actions have you taken in the years that you've been politically active to do that?
So I'm going to say it like this because I think we got to, whoever wins the primary, we got to get behind him. So I don't want to say that he can't win. So I'm going to say this. I think it's more of a challenge because, as someone he's never won an election, he's never served as an elected official. They call it the power of incumbency for a reason. Incumbents tend to win because when you have a record to run on and you've connected with people, they know you, they trust you, that translates into turnout. And when you're trying to focus on marginal voters, which this election is going to be won in the margins, having someone who does not have that record, the only argument you can make is anti-Hawley. And we found that just an anti-Trump, an anti-Hawley message doesn't win. You got to be for something too. You got to be pro something. And so, yeah, we're going to run anti-Hawley as well. But we're also going to run pro us. We're going to run pro our public safety record. We're going to run pro pushing women's reproductive rights issues and never wavering on it. We're going to run on every single time there is a case that involves that highlights the lack of gun safety laws in this state. We go public with it. And so we can run on, and for the moderates, we can run on our public safety record. Because here's one thing that frustrates me. Republicans think that they have a monopoly on public safety. And Democrats sometimes statewide and nationally, we don't push hard enough on that issue. But they lose that argument with me. We have the data to show, yes, we have expanded treatment programs. We believe that if you're struggling with opioid abuse and struggling with mental health, you should get help. But we got the data to show that on serious and violent offenses, we push. Hawley can't make that argument. Mr. Koontz would struggle to make that argument as well. And so, if you're asking me, I would say, look at the numbers, look at how we have to win, and then ask yourself, how do you get low frequency voters out? Is it just running off anti-Hawley? Because I'm gonna tell you right now, low frequency voters don't see Hawley. I hate to use the word hate, but don't hate Hawley like we hate Hawley. They just see him as another politician who doesn't keep their word and is just crazy or what have you. You got to give those folks a reason to come out. You got to be able to tell them, this is why you should come out and vote for me, not just against him. And I think that that's going to be a challenge for the other folks in the race. So with that said, I want to answer the question directly. Listen, if somebody else wins this primary, man, listen, I'm going to do everything that I can to get them elected. But I think that poll is just another testament to what I'm saying. He has been running. He has been spending money after money in the primary, which we're not going to do. We are priming ourselves to beat Hawley. If that doesn't work, then we're going to support the winner. But we're not going to just focus on the primary. I mean, we're not going to ignore the primary at all, as you can see. But we're not focused. We're focused on Hawley. He's focused on the primary, and it's not translating into votes. Again, we just announced in June We are just introducing ourselves around the state and working hard to do that. And we're still ahead of him against Hawley, and we haven't even gotten started. I think that tells you everything you need to know.
I want to ask you just a quick question.
Okay.
You now have a red, white, and blue, 3 different shirts with your polo shirts with your name on it.
I do. And I thought that was you that said that. I already had the blue and the white one, and I have the red one now. And so, yes, I remember we talked about that.
He came to the picnic with the name embroidered on his shirt. I said, you need to get him in all of the red, white, and blue color. I know red's not the best color to wear, but
That's why.
But if you're in a Democratic thing and you can wear something else blue, you can wear a blue blazer on top of it, and then you've got the red, white, and blue.
Hey, I heard you. That was my reluctance. It's like, I'm not getting a red shirt. But then I was like, yeah, you're right. There's
You look good in red.
time for it. Good to have it.
Yeah, they don't own red.
Thank you, sir.
We can wear red if we want to wear red. Thank you so
That's
much for
absolutely-
being here. I know you've got a plane to catch, so we don't want you to be late for that. But we really appreciate you being here today. This has been really great.
And I just want to thank you all again for giving me the opportunity to make my case. I want to be clear. I'm going to be out there stumping for Democrats, as I always have. We've got to build the electorate because we have the numbers, we have the math, we have the path, and we got to flip this state. And we're going to start in 2024, but it cannot stop there. So thanks for doing what you all do, because being involved is the biggest part of the equation, is having our hardcore Dems that are there and spreading the word. This is where it starts. And I thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for giving me some of your time.
Great. Safe travels.
All right.
Thank you, Wesley.
Thank you.
And then with that, we will move on to the business meeting. I'm sorry.
Could I just make one quick thing?
Sure.
I wanted to mention, if somebody didn't earlier, and that was that Doug Mann will be speaking at the Unitarian Forum on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. And we meet in the basement.